When you open your C2-0 file, make sure the first two sketches are visible. We'll use these for references later. I'm then going to enter my sculpt environment and start by creating a sphere. Using my origin planes, I can reference the points for my first sketch. I'll make sure that I have this set to a diameter of 1. Using the other plane, I'm going to edit and create a new sphere. Both these spheres will have the same diameter, but will be facing different directions. You'll also notice that the first sphere I made, the segments are now lined up with the planes. In order to make this lined up, I will turn off my sketch and then use the move command to rotate it 30 degrees. When I turn those sketches back on, notice how the segments line up with the plane. This will make it much easier to create symmetry between the two spheres later on. Now, I'm going to keep my symmetry off because I'm going to divide these into quarters later. Because of that, I'm only concerned about the top half of this first sphere. I can move it around and even use the flatten tool to make sure that I have a nice surface that lines up with the original sketch. The reason this is important because I'm using that as a reference in order to make sure that my different designs have similar parameters. With the first sphere flattened, I'm then going to concentrate on the second sphere. Again, I can flatten and move, or move and flatten. This is something for you to experiment with. Try doing one first and then the other. By drag selecting, it makes it much easier to both flatten and select geometry. Now that I have half of each flattened, I can turn off my sketches and then delete half of each of the spheres from both sides. The result will be a quarter of each sphere. This will allow me to have a nice bridge when I use the bridge command. With the bridge command, I want to make sure I select an equal number of faces from each quarter of the sphere. Because I used a quarter of each sphere, I would now like to symmetry duplicate, so mirror my body or surface across the plane to make it a half, and then again to make it a whole. What you'll notice in this process is that I have a segment in the middle that has a hole all the way through. To fix this, I can simply select faces that I do not want and then delete them using my delete key. Because there's segments in the middle now, it goes into box mode. By simply deleting the segments in the middle, and rotate, you can see from the top, there's more. By the time I delete the last one, it will go back into smooth. Since I want this symmetric, I'll delete the same faces on the top and the sides. I'm left with 4 holes, and I can use my fill tool to fill in those holes. I simply select one edge and then OK. I'm going to do this for both holes. And since I mirrored my model, you'll see that it's symmetry on both sides, which are those green lines. So I do it to one side, the other side will have it the same. From here, I can start to manipulate and move my model. This is where it gets a lot of fun. Notice if I drag it too far though, my reference sketch, I start to lose the circular shape. So by having the sketches on, I'm able to make changes and explore my designs while making sure that I'm in my parameters, keeping the design close to my C0 or C1 model. After I've done a little exploration, I'd like to have some nice hard edges. To do this, I'm going to use the crease command, and I'm going to turn off my sketches to make it easier to make sure I select the right edges. The crease command is going to give me a nice hard edge on the lines or segments I select. In order to make this more obvious, I can start to manipulate or change other parts of the geometry. Notice when I grab these edges and I move them in and move them down, what happens to that line I just creased. What that does is it emphasizes where that crease is. As you can see, it becomes more to a point as I drag my other lines down. Again, this is something that you can spend time fooling around with. I would challenge you to explore different ideas, scale them up, scale them down, and see how when you have a line that's creased, when you drag other lines close to it, how that affects the curvature and the blending between the two. Since I would like to keep this symmetric, every time I do something to one side of my model, I'll repeat it to the other. Now that I've creased one side or edge, I'm going to crease another section. Notice when I crease this and improve the profile loops all the way around, that there's a nice crisp edge where the circle blends into the line. Just like before, I have a nice hard edge. In order to emphasize this, I can manipulate my model by grabbing points, dragging them around, and exploring. From the top view, from the right view, we can see different results, and I can scale the edges, and I can also drag them. Along with edges, I can select points as well. As I manipulate them to a larger diameter and a smaller diameter, I notice that the edge becomes sharper or smoother. I also like to manipulate the blends in between the two. By looking at the top and the front view, I can start to see different perspectives on how the two, what were once spheres, blend together. Once I'm happy with my design, I'm going to exit my freeform modeling, and I'm going to enter into parametric modeling. To make this easier, I'm going to turn off the visibility of my first body and use my sketches to make my shapes, which I'll be subtracting from my first body. I'm going to drag this up a specific distance and then create a sketch and project that circle onto the top face. I'll be using this for a loft in just a minute. In order to make sure I have my next sketch at the proper height, I can turn on my body and for distance, select a point for reference. In this sketch, I'm going to reuse that circle for my other sketch, and then I'm going to use a point for my geometry as a way to tie my two sketches together. With my arc tool, I'm going to select a point close to the middle and then the edges of my circle. I'm also going to create tangency on these circles. As I'm creating my sketch, I want to make sure that it's symmetric around the center point. And I can see I don't have a point there for reference. What I can do is simply project from my model or body the point I want to reference and use a constraint to tie them two together. With my sketches complete, again it will be easier to turn off the visibility of my body and then use my loft command. Once I have it lofted, I can then use mirror to have the same design on both sides. Since the model is symmetric, the mirror command will allow me to make my new body symmetric as well. When I mirror this over the other plane, notice that it's perpendicular to the sketch, which I know my face looks like. In order to make that the same, I can use my move command similar to what I used earlier with my spheres to rotate the second bodies I'm going to use for my cut. So again, I'm going to select my two bodies. And in the move command, I have the ability to set my pivot. When you use the set pivot, make sure you hit the green check mark before actually rotating. Otherwise, you're just rotating the pivot. With my two new mirrored bodies properly rotated, I can then turn on the first body. Using my Modify Combine tool, I can then subtract the two new bodies I made in parametric mode from my sculpted body. The end result is quite unique in the sense I have nice sharp edges with some blends, and then I have my crease edges for my sculpted body. If I'd like to smooth out those creased edges even more, I can add a fillet to these edges. With my fillet tool, I simply select the line and then type in a distance or a radius. This will conclude the exercise for the C2-0 model. Thank you.